All right, we're recording. This is office hours for August 5 for service APIs. For those of you that have been keeping track, not that long ago, I said, maybe not particularly wisely, that it'd be really cool to get V1 Alpha 1 release out in August. We got at least one thing moved from in progress to completed in the past week, and progress on a couple other things. At least, probably at least 3 of these areas have seen progress since last week. I know, Harry, you've been working on TLS config. Yeah, how are things going there? Do you need any help? I think you were hoping for someone to look at your docs more.
Yeah, I mean, so last week I was focused on advanced routing. I think there are 2 PRs
Okay.
up, and so though
Great.
that's like, we need to go through the PR review process and get that done. So I think that will be the end of that section. TLS config, the docs are up. There has been mostly consensus.
Yep.
I've cobbled together something, but I've still to polish it. So I have some time tomorrow and Friday. So by the end of this
Okay.
week, I plan to have at least a couple of PRs to cover like 70% of that proposal. And then there are a couple of controversial parts that, will follow up later on. So,
Yeah. Yeah, specifically I think the most controversial part was the route level TLS config. Is that
correct.
it?
Yeah. So
Yeah.
we are divided, and some people find it useful, some people are against it. So we have to talk more about it.
Okay. That's great. Thanks for
It's
taking
kind of
those on. Those are,
always
yeah.
going to be true, right? Like, I think wherever you put, wherever we put a piece of API, there's always like an audience for that.
Yeah.
I think that the risk is that we just have all these pieces of API, so many pieces of API.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
Completely agree there. I pinged Bowie about service level config. I think he'll be on this meeting in a bit, so maybe I'll follow up later on with that. As far as I know, that's still making progress. I'm just haven't gotten an update recently. Conflict handling semantics. I apologize because I just keep on taking up whatever time is left in meetings with whatever questions I have around conflict handling. So progress is going there. I think, for a lot of the conflict handling, I'm starting to get into the weeds and things that we may not need an answer to right away. But I think I may have enough or close to enough where I can get some of the high level stuff in place and actually documented and better defined in the API. And this has also led to some larger discussions that are related but different. As an example, gateway class and its place in this. Yeah. So anyway, but that is progressing. If anyone wants to help, if anyone has questions around conflict handling or things that they would like to add or have covered, I am very, very open to collaborating with people or just getting feedback, whatever it is. And the last one, I think we'd asked Damien to try and take on some work on status and conditions. Is that still reasonable for you, Damien?
I guess I'm kind of in the middle.
Okay.
I'm starting to spend some time looking into the implementation of service APIs, and I would like to be able to focus in on that along with kind of my normal day-to-day responsibilities.
Sure.
So if it's possible, if someone else can pick this up, that would be great. If not, then it's something I'll take on.
Cool. While we're here, is there anyone who wants to volunteer for this one? All right, I can circulate this. Oh, awesome. Okay, great.
I can sync with Danny. I can sync with Danny and do it. I'd like to get an idea of what Danny and I'll talk to Danny offline about it and we
Okay.
can collaborate.
Yeah, and I do want to sync up with Bowie on service level config. I did have some
Okay.
comments there, so I'll probably follow up a little later.
Okay. Perfect. All right. Well, yeah, I think that's great. Thank you to everyone for contributing here. I feel like we have a relatively manageable list of things to get done. If you're looking at this list, does anything feel notably absent as a prerequisite for V1 Alpha 1 API? Okay. Yeah, we'll definitely keep on thinking about this. If there are things we don't have on our list on our roadmap that we need to get in before V1 Alpha 1, it'd be great to know. But at this point, maybe I'm a little too optimistic, but it does, all of these things at least feel like they're doable in some time in August. We'll see. Cool. All right, so let's move on to some PR issue. Well, actually, this is 100% PR triage today. No new issues that I noticed, at least. Feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. James, I added one comment just earlier, well, probably early morning for you based on your time zone, but early afternoon for me a few hours ago. One of the things I noticed, it's great that you took this one on. You added some better validation hooks here. I'm not seeing this. This should translate to CRD YAML, right? Oh,
Yeah, the thing is that it moved. So it moves to, if you move the validation from the field up to a type,
okay.
the CRD gen lowers that back to the field when it generates the Open API spec. So it ends up being a no op.
Okay.
What happens, you can see the difference if you have the validation in two places, like on the type and on the field, then it will generate Open API spec that looks like it means apply both of these kinds of validations, and it'll because they're the same, it'll look like a duplicate.
Got it.
But in all of these cases, we had the validation already, but it was on the field, and so hoisting it up makes it easier to, visually more obvious that, okay, I've got the list of things for the API docs in the same way as the validation.
Perfect.
It'd be it'd be kind of nicer if I pulled my finger out and got the API and updated the API docs to look at the validations and generate that list, but I didn't.
Oh, yeah. Reasonable enough. At least it is well defined and close together. Like this would be a lot harder to maintain if, like you were saying, this validation annotation was on the type and this had to be here. Like if these were two different places, I think that would get a lot more painful to maintain. But the way you've done it here, I think, is great. Cool. Well, I don't think anything else.
So there's one weird thing with which people might want to know. In the forward to, so there's two other things I smuggled in this change. The header match type in the HTTP route is no longer a pointer because it's not. So yeah, right at the bottom of your screen. Scroll down. Yep, there it is. So because we have a default, even if you omit the field, the API server defaults it.
Got it.
So I don't think being a pointer has any actual effect.
Yeah, this I think the guidance is if there is no significant difference between empty string and nil, then you don't need to use a pointer type. And in this case, empty string is not really particularly meaningful here. So yeah, this seems like a reasonable change as well to me.
And the other thing is in route action, I added a validation to the slice to say it must have at least, it has a minimum elements of 1.
That's what if somebody's using the extension ref?
Yeah, that's the corner case that I was thinking about. But I convinced myself that the extension ref applies to how you forward, not necessarily that you have to forward.
Oh, right. Yes, that's right.
Oh, wait. That's,
I just refreshed and the diff. Oh, okay. Danian's PR went in and you suggested adding this on Danian's PR. I think that's what it is.
oh, okay. So, I just rebased, so it must have merged it.
Yeah. Yeah. That was confusing. Yeah. Okay.
I should rewrite the commit message at least anyway.
Okay.
So question regarding header match type, so this is going to be a little confusing. If somebody is not using a header match, we have a default of exact. So somebody would have like a path type match, and somebody would have a header match type, but they won't have a headers to match on.
Huh. That's a great point. Yeah.
Yep. Yep, that's exactly the point. I think that's why we had the pointer there at the first place.
So the pointer, it feels like we probably just don't want a default value here at all. Does
We
that
do
make
want
sense?
conditional default, but that's not a thing.
Right.
But if you have to specify it because it's a pointer type, then you have to specify it. Like there's not really a default.
Yeah.
I can
I'm the one
how
who
about
added that line.
how about I update this PR to remove instead of remove the pointer to remove the default.
I think that's going to make more sense. We may want to clarify, this line here, default exact, maybe it should be if unspecified default is, so yeah, I don't know, or maybe we do need to require it to be specified. If you're using headers, you also need to specify a match type. I'm not sure. Huh. Yeah, I would lean away from I would lean away from a default here because what Harry said makes all the sense in the world. We don't want to have a header match type if we don't have any headers specified. That's confusing. Does anyone have a preference between implying something out of an empty value or requiring that someone actually specify a header match type if headers are specified?
How do you enforce
Did
that?
You can't. I guess that's it. You can't. Other than with a validating webhook, which we are planning on. So
Maybe another way approach we could take is to have a none value. So path
That's
match
what I was
none
just getting ready to
at a
say, is like
table.
unspecified or empty string
Snap.
or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, if we had a none designated none value, which was the empty string.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
I think
I
empty
prefer
string
that.
is confusing there, because then if empty string maps to none, which you would assume means no header match, and you have headers defined below, then it's not clear that just an empty value for header match type means that no header matching is going to happen. I would rather have, if we want our default to be none, then you could spell that out so it's clear that default is none, so there's no header matching going on. Or I don't know.
So I think that line of reasoning takes you to adding a struct to collect the path match and the type and the path, and another struct to collect the header match type and headers, and then you can specify.
The default.
Then you can specify, then the struct being absent or present.
Yeah.
Is
Can
how
you can you
ask for the match.
can you do that with like without indenting it further, like including the
No,
struct
I think
directly?
it would. I think it would indent further. So path match would become, the indentation would go like route match, and then indent path, and then type, exact.
No, but what happens
value.
if you include? um I don't know what's the feature in Go that's called it. Like embedding, type embedding. If you do that, what happens then?
But then okay, so inline, if you inline
Yes, yeah.
in JSON and embed the type, then you get the fields. The fields of the type are hoisted up one level, and you get what you have here, but with a different syntax.
Yeah, that doesn't solve our problem.
Yeah, unfortunately not. I do think that potentially the better way to solve this is with those embedded those extra structs, that extra level of nesting, but agree that this is not the PR to solve that. At least I don't think so. Like this PR is pretty reasonably scoped towards fixing validation rules. So I would either move away from changes here, or just keep changes minimal and file a follow-up issue where we can explore different ways to handle this default value. I think what we need is a follow-up issue or PR, that really we should not be setting a default for header match type. Does that make sense?
So for the time being, leave header match type as a pointer. And then, as you mentioned, Rob, create a PR or an issue and then link to that issue in this PR for tracking purposes as it merges.
That would be my thought, because this has been a helpful discussion, and I agree that a default value here does not make sense. At least under the constraints we have of, you want a default value if headers is set, but we can't do that, right? Without further nesting, and that's out of the scope of this PR. So I would, yeah, like you're saying, move this back to a pointer, minimize the changes related to this here, and then link a follow-up issue to deal with defaulting here, because I think that could result in further restructuring of, potentially at least moving header and header match into its own struct, or other things, but that seems like a larger discussion anyway.
Yeah, I'm in favor of that approach.
Cool. All right, I'll make a note to come back to this too and add a comment as a follow-up. But yeah, thank you for taking this on. There are a lot of great improvements around validation here. It's good to see taking advantage of what what CRD validation we can. Yeah. Okay, so oh,
Hey
go
Rob,
ahead.
can we do one of my PRs? I have to drop at 3:30.
Oh, sure. I probably have them up here. Which one is it? Or
There are two of those, the HTTP route filter and the pluralize match, the last two.
okay. Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, no problem. So yeah, HTTP route filter. I know I commented on this one. This feels like it may be a bit more advanced. So let me go to the pluralize multiple matches because I think this is going to be an easier one to handle.
Yes. Yes. I agree.
Yeah. Okay, so I just wanted to come back to this one and remember try and remind ourselves what the consensus was on this. I seem to remember that not in general people didn't mind this, but there were some thoughts that we could wait to add this till later, till it was actually until someone requested it.
The big question was around the ordering. Is it an and or an or?
Yeah, yeah. And I think the follow-up around that made it okay to be an and, sorry, to be an or, because basically a match is a set of paths. So you wouldn't or headers, but in the example where each potential match has a path specified, an and is just never going to make sense. At least in my understanding of this. So I think we're okay with or. Does that make sense to you, Damian?
It does, but I just pulled up this PR
Yeah.
to dig into it a little bit. I'll do it here at the end of this call, so it's not.
Okay. All right. Well, yeah. I think it's fine for me, but yeah, I appreciate any additional feedback, and I'll try and follow up with anyone who might have issues. But this is just a reminder, if you have any issues with this approach, please comment on this PR, because right now the only comments are positive ones. And I think we've had discussions on calls that have indicated some confusion around here. So I just want to make sure that we get any kind of any of that out in this PR, so we get both viewpoints or all viewpoints accounted for. Okay, yes, but I know, Harry, you've got to go soon, and this is a much larger PR.
Yeah, we should probably discuss this tomorrow because I think we have a larger crowd and this is much more controversial, I guess. So.
It is, yeah. So you added a route filter. I had a couple questions on this one. Yes, okay, so what is a union discriminator? I've never seen that before as an annotation.
So this is what I was, I think Makaya was talking about the last call. So it actually doesn't generate, I think Cube Builder does not interpret this one. But I can send the link later of how OpenShift APIs use this one. So this follows the cap of union discriminator. Let me.
I put a link to the union discriminator in the unions cap.
Yeah. So that it follows that cap where we have first class support for unions inside Kubernetes APIs.
Cool. Okay. That's awesome. I'll do some more reading on this. Thanks for the link. Yeah, the other one I wanted to cover, I know you've got to run soon. But this config, it seems like this was somewhere between core and custom. Like this was a middle ground. Is that correct? correct?
Yeah, it's for custom, but it's just meant for cases where we don't want, if somebody does not want to use a CRD and just inline something, it's for those cases. So I mean, we can definitely add this later on. Don't have strong feelings for it.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, no, I agree. We should cover this tomorrow in more detail. I'll make sure it's on the agenda.
And I see a message from James in the chat, and I think he brought this up when Micaiah last brought up the union types, that even though you have the union discriminator tag there,
Yeah, it doesn't
it
do
doesn't really
like
do
at
anything.
least Cube Builder doesn't do anything, right? But I
Yeah.
think there are what do we call this? Open API conventions or extensions that can be used. You'll have to handwrite those, but I'm not too sure about that either.
Yeah, and I think James provided a link to the issue that he's talking about. James, if you could hear us, maybe share that, and we may want to add that to the Go Docs here so that we don't lose track of it.
Okay, I heard that. I'll add a comment. You want me to just link that in the reply? I could probably dig up that issue.
Yeah, that'd be great. All right, perfect. So I'll make sure. It looks like Harry just dropped or about to. I'll make sure we revisit route filter later. There's lots to dig through here, and if anyone has time, it would be a great issue to have read through for PR to have read through first, because well, you can see the diff. It's a relatively large one. Admittedly, plenty of code gen too, but yeah. And the last one that I wanted to cover, kind of going out of order here, is reordering make targets. It looks like there's already a couple LGTMs, and yeah, this is a really tiny PR. And I guess
I came across the issue. I didn't open up an issue, but you see in the commit message where I was just making a small change to API and PR250 and tried to run make all, and that's basically what I got. As soon as I swapped the order of, and I don't think it's necessarily generating the controller. I think it's the running vet is the problem, but
yeah, okay.
I don't think we want to untangle the make targets from the kube builder make. So maybe this is the right approach. I mean, has anyone else seen this issue?
I probably just ran it again and saw it. I think this is. I gave this a approval. I think this is fine. I know I saw the comment from Bowie about wanting proper dependencies in May.
Oh yeah, the thing is, if you reorder it, it doesn't fix it necessarily if you're doing make-j. Because I don't think make actually is supposed to understand the ordering. But if it fixes, we can merge it, like if it fixes the ordering issue for you, but I don't think it actually properly fixes it.
And Bowie, that's because make all doesn't necessarily run those targets in the order specified in the make file?
I don't think that's the case with make-j, because otherwise you wouldn't be able to do parallel make.
But these are all phony targets anyway, so if you're doing parallel make and there's an actual dependency tree, make doesn't know that it should only run these things once, right?
Phony just tells it to always run it. It doesn't, I think the dependency still makes sense, because phony is phony is dependent on that, so it'll always trigger it, but it won't But if you have dependencies on other things, it will build the other things. In any event, I think the PR is fine. Like if it fixes it for you for now, I just don't think it actually fixes the problem like overall. So I'll merge this, Damien, if this is causing your build to have problems. It just, someone else might hit something later.
All right. Yeah. I mean, if after this merges, this happens again, then I'll kind of follow the proper procedures and create an issue, and then hopefully also have time to figure out what the real issue is.
Cool. All right. Well, thanks. Thanks for fixing this. I think that's it for PR and issue triage. Were there any more PRs or issues that we haven't covered that we should? Well, I'm thinking about it. I'll make sure that we have Harry's work on route filter at the top of the list for tomorrow. Okay. Cool. So the next one is an issue I meant to file, but haven't gotten around to it yet. But there is, it came up recently that default doesn't really make sense in route spec. At least it doesn't make sense to me. If you think of gateways referencing multiple routes, then and kind of essentially what would happen is those route rules are going to get merged. It's very, very unclear and vague what on earth a bunch of defaults, like how do you merge defaults in that way? It doesn't really seem to make sense, at least to me. It seems like you could effectively recreate a default behavior just with a route that matches everything, a route rule that matches everything, just slash. Is anyone tied to having this default here?
I think the way I hadn't thought about it deeply, but thinking about it for 3 seconds just now, I probably would have implemented this as a conflict if more than one selected route had a default.
Yeah, I agree.
Which I think
that.
isn't necessarily, it's not necessarily what was intended there, I think, though.
I agree. This is something that would inevitably come up in conflict resolution. And
I think this came over. Sorry, I think this came over as part of Ingress V1, right? So.
Yep. And Ingress potentially makes a little bit more sense here, maybe. But because we have this separation between gateway and route, it feels even more potentially troublesome. I don't know. Sorry, what were you going to say?
I was just going to say, can anyone provide some background since it was brought in from Ingress V1? And anyone provide some background on the purpose of its existence in Ingress V1?
That's a great question. Yeah, I'd have to go back through and look through our notes for that. I remember it seeming at the time like a simple way to provide a default, but admittedly, default is something that can easily be in the same Ingress API can easily be accomplished with just an additional route rule. Well, an additional rule. So even there, it is rather repetitive. Yeah.
I'm
That
trying to
is a good
think
question.
if a user created several HTTP route hosts that have different paths that are pointing to different backend services, but would they want some kind of default so that if none of those match, it goes to some special error page or something like that?
Yeah, and that's generally been the idea here, and I definitely get the idea of having this kind of default where none of your route rules match, and you want 404 or similar kind of behavior. But that is equally easy to accomplish with a route rule that matches everything. Maybe it's slightly less clear. Like there is something nice about, okay, this is a default. If nothing matches, just go here. But fundamentally speaking, it is equivalent to a rule that matches everything. So yeah, my thought is, especially in this world where we're doing so much merging, and we're trying to avoid conflicts where possible, it makes sense to remove a potential conflict, and also with the idea that this is a alpha API and it's going to be a lot easier to add things in the future than to remove them. When in doubt, I'd rather remove than retain.
Yeah, I agree with that as well. I was thinking that it's just easier to remove it, and then when the use case is presented, then go ahead and add it in the future, as opposed to having it now and then it becomes more difficult to remove it in the future.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
great.
that makes sense to me too.
I feel with ingress it's made more sense because there could be only one route, but here we could easily have multiple routes associated with one gateway, so it becomes a lot more confusing.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah. Great. So yeah, I think that'll be a nice little bit of cleanup. And speaking of cleanup, I went ahead. We talked about this last week. I just ran the idea by, I think, both office hours and the main meeting of this kind of pre-alpha API review. And okay, Harry just added a comment. Yes, I'm not sure exactly how to do this, and I'm glad that Harry has added his feedback here. I am very, very open to other approaches here. I'm not too invested in this. Some background on this. This was inspired by two things. This was inspired by I think it was James had mentioned a while back that it would be really good for us to just walk through the entire API top to bottom and add comments, feedback, whatever, as we got to something that didn't make sense. And second, I talked with Tim a bit about how we could get better feedback from him on this API, especially before we try to do an alpha release. And he'd also requested a way to provide feedback over the entire API in one shot, which is hard to do. Like Harry mentions here, one option would be to link to the GitHub files to keep them in sync, as an example. That would be easier to keep in sync, absolutely, but I think it's harder to provide feedback in the, at a per line level of the, as I quickly realized as I was copying this over, some of our types are quite verbose already. This is a large doc, and so commenting on a specific file or a specific anything may not be precise enough. If you really want to comment on, say, a specific field or a specific default, or I don't know, whatever it might be. So that was my motivation for this doc, but I fully recognize that this is going to get annoying to maintain. I'm volunteering to maintain that, but I do recognize it will get annoying. And I am wholeheartedly open to other ideas here. I really just, the end goal here is to make it very easy for both ourselves and anyone we want to get feedback from to provide feedback over the entire API instead of just individual pull requests. So that's the motivation for this doc. Does anyone have any thoughts, other approaches, etc. around this?
I see the awkwardness of maintaining the doc, and that I don't necessarily have a different suggestion. And one thing the doc does give us is a way to kind of get feedback from implementers and interested parties who aren't coming to the calls and who probably won't come to a synchronous call.
Yeah, I mean that's exactly what I'm thinking. Even for someone getting involved in service APIs tomorrow, let's say, and they come to every single call, they're really only going to have great opportunities to provide feedback on new things. And for existing API components, your option is really, well, I'll read through all the types and then create issues as I find them, which works, but it can be more time intensive as far as review than just going through a single doc like this. That's the thought process. I'm interested in trying this out. At least, maybe we can try it out internally. I've already, the nice thing about, the nice and annoying thing about Google Docs is it gives you all these cool underlines. It did catch a number of grammatical things that I have, in some cases, suggested changes for, which apparently I'm not finding any comments. Yeah, okay, there's a few things that it caught that we should fix. These are all pretty tiny things, but I think it will be helpful to have something like this so we can all take a second look at where we've gotten to, because it's very, very easy to, at least for me, to get caught up in these incremental changes and not take the time to look back over the whole thing and make sure that, all these incremental changes that made sense individually have actually resulted in something that makes sense as a whole. Which hopefully.
Are you okay if I circulate this internally at VMware?
Yes. That's so. That was going to be my next question. Well, set of questions. Okay, not VMware specifically, but do we want to get anything else in here before we start circulating this? I don't know. I think what we have is a pretty reasonable base to start getting feedback. I can't think of anything that I'm uncomfortable sharing right now. I'm looking at the PRs that are coming in that haven't made it yet, and I don't think they're absolutely critical to have in for our first round of review, circulation, etc. Obviously, once we figure out TSL, TLS and more of this route binding stuff. I think that will be helpful. But I think where we are right now is a good enough starting point to start getting some broader feedback. Can anyone think of anything we should wait for? Any, feature functionality that we're close to getting in or clean up that we'd rather wait for before circulating?
Maybe I missed it, but does the doc make reference to kind of the outstanding features that have yet to merge but are currently being developed?
That's a great question. It does not. I should add that at the top here as maybe the easiest way would be to link to the V1 Alpha 1 checklist because that's currently showing the things that are in progress that are not currently part of this spec, and it will automatically be updated as things are resolved and added here. Does that seem like it would be sufficient?
I think so. Maybe just, in bold lettering or something, just telling people, hey, take a look so you understand that there are still some outstanding items. Otherwise, if people don't know that, they're going to go through here and they're probably going to mention stuff around status conditions and things of that nature.
Yeah, you're right. Okay, that's great feedback. I will do that. And then we do have a SIG network meeting tomorrow afternoon, community meeting. So I will probably, if it's all right with everyone, I'll try and circulate this among that community as well, just to try and get some feedback from them as well. I think that would be really valuable. At this point, I think the more feedback we can get within reason will be helpful. Though I do recognize that too much, that this could also turn into a very distracting exercise. But we'll deal with that when we get there.
Yeah, thanks for volunteering to maintain this.
Yeah.
Yeah, because my other thought was, does it make sense to put it out on the mailing list? If that's what we're trying to achieve, is try to get as much eyes on the API spec before we go alpha.
Yeah, I think that will make sense. I want to be somewhat strategic. Personally, I want to invest some of my own time to actually run through this myself and understand it, try to understand if there are things here that are just completely missing. I'd appreciate, before we circulate this too much, even just over the next less than 24 hours, whatever it is, but just if you have some time to run through this and see if there are things that are just, beyond typos, but just things that don't really make sense or gaps in the API. I think this is a great opportunity to do that. But yeah, I think circulating this broadly starting sometime tomorrow could be helpful. Okay. All right. Well, that is about it, other than conflict resolution. But I always add conflict resolution at the end of meetings just to try and fit in a few more things. But before we get there, are there other topics that we should discuss as part of this meeting today? Great. Well, I'll always take some time for conflict resolution. So I think some of the higher level things that I've been hearing as part of feedback here is we do want to be specific, but there are some cases where we can't it's too early to solve everything. It's too early to be too prescriptive about everything because we can't predict how everything is actually going to be used. But I do think these guiding principles are broadly supported at this point. So at least, you know, actually standardizing on these and putting them into checking them into code somewhere, I think would be helpful. There are some other issues here that I think might be worth a little bit of discussion. One that I had raised, I forget who actually raised this one, but I think it's a broadly supported idea that if TLS is available, implementations are likely going to prefer it. So if you're listening on both protocols, as an example, I don't know that we have a way to communicate that a specific protocol is preferred over another protocol. Maybe that's something that isn't necessarily a conflict and we don't need to formalize it, but it was just an interesting concept of there is at least some common idea of a specific protocol being preferred over another protocol. I don't know that we need to formalize that anywhere, but it was an interesting piece of feedback that seemed relevant here. Okay. Trying to think of anything that we haven't already covered. I think in various meetings now, I've gotten good feedback on all the various conflicts that I have raised or suggested at this point. One that I have not thought of enough is if multiple gateways choose to request, like if multiple gateways request the same address, I think this one is going to go right back to the idea of oldest resource wins. Unfortunately, that again can cause an issue if the new request for an IP ends up, well, I guess with IP assignment, you should already know if an IP is already assigned. So that's probably a non-issue. Oldest resource wins unless the IP is already assigned to something. I don't know. I mean, is there much more to say on this? Is this any more complex than I'm making it sound right now?
Actually, I'm wondering how this interacts with gateway merging. I remember we talked about that a while ago, and I'm fuzzy on the details. But if you have the same address, is that when you would combine it and say these gateways represent effectively the same gateway and should be merged?
I think that topic does need more discussion. I'm interested more in the use case of gateway merging. I think obviously ingress merging or something like that made a lot of sense. Gateway merging seems less clear to me because gateways can already target multiple routes. And it's less clear to me when you would choose to merge or want to merge gateways. But I do know this has come up, but I think it would be helpful to understand the use cases behind it. So I don't know, can anyone think of when that might be useful?
It was related to the virtual host use case, but I don't remember all the details offhand.
I think for at least the way I've been thinking about the virtual host use case is that you don't specify an address.
Okay, so if two gateways don't specify an address, that's not a conflict. But if two gateways specify the same address, then that is.
Yeah, that could be depending on your infrastructure, I suppose, or depending on what your gateway, the listeners that you have in your gateways, maybe. Like, I can imagine if two gateways specified the same address, but they had listeners listening on disjoint sets of ports, then that could be implemented in a single network element.
So in that case, I think kind of a natural follow-up to that is this next one here. If gateways don't specify a VIP, don't request a VIP, and they're more like a virtual host, I suppose. And it seems like there would still need to be some kind of merging happening there. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah, if you don't specify, yeah.
Okay,
So
so in that case, we still need to at least think about implementations that might merge gateways or might support merging gateways, and specifically how, because that seems like it could open up a whole slew of potential conflicts, right? You have duplicate listener ports protocols, etc. It seems potentially useful, but it also feels scary to handle from the number of conflicts it could introduce.
Maybe. So I guess one way if you don't request a gateway, some infrastructure is going to. Sorry, if you don't request an address, some infrastructure is going to be able to, you know, assign an address from a pool, and you'll be golden. The in-cluster ingresses, at least from Contour, has a fixed set of a fixed data plane footprint, and it has some address already, and so it'll probably try to merge multiple gateways. The main thing in a gateway is the listeners. So
Yeah.
if you can merge listeners within a gateway and your gateways are sort of similar, then I maybe merging multiple gateways is just like a relatively simple extension to merging sets of listeners.
I think that's a good point. One of the, when we talked about listener conflicts, one of these solutions was, we can handle this with validation, right? You do a validating webhook, you ensure uniqueness within the gateway of all the listeners, well, as much as you can. Whereas across gateways, you don't have as much safety with validation. But I think a lot of these same principles will apply here. Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, but you're right. You do have the uncomfortable behavior of allowing someone to submit config that's broken, and then having to, undo that or keep your existing state working somehow.
Yeah. All right. Well, I know we're already over time. Thank you to everyone for the great feedback today. I'm excited. It feels like we're within reach here, not too far away from a release, hopefully. So, thank you to everyone for your contributions, and we'll talk to you all soon.
Thanks, Rob.
Have a great one. See you.